There is a particular kind of tired that lives in the jaw. The shoulders held at exactly the wrong angle all afternoon. A texture in the eyes that has nothing to do with darkness and everything to do with a day that hasn't quite let go. You've been here before. Reaching for sleep the way you might reach for something on a high shelf. Straining slightly. Not quite sure why it keeps moving away. Somewhere in the body's chemistry, there are minerals that exist for exactly this. Not to force rest, but to speak to your nervous system in a language it already understands. A handful of seeds, a bowl of dark greens, a square of chocolate you didn't feel guilty about, and inside all of it, something your body has been asking for all day. The part that changes the story. The science doesn't show magnesium as a cure. It shows it as a quiet negotiator, modest in its results, honest in its limits. And somehow that is more interesting than a cure would have been. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Tonight, one question follows us into the quiet. Can a mineral speak to your nervous system and ask it, gently, to let go? You're somewhere the day has finally stopped finding you. Let your weight settle into the surface beneath. Let tonight begin where the body already knows. You know that feeling when the muscles won't quite release even after you've decided to stop. Jaw still set from the afternoon. A particular weight behind the eyes that has a very familiar address. Magnesium deficiency doesn't announce itself loudly. It arrives as exactly that. The body that won't fully release. Research shows that magnesium acts as a natural antagonist to the NMDA receptor, one of the main excitatory channels in the nervous system. Without enough of it, those channels stay open a little longer than they should. Calcium floods through, and the muscles receive the signal to hold rather than let go. One quiet question opens tonight. Can something as small as a mineral speak to the nervous system and ask it to stand down? The number that matters most tonight is not one you would guess. More than 300. That is the count of enzymatic reactions in the human body that require magnesium as a cofactor. Heart rhythm, protein assembly, DNA replication, the conversion of food into usable energy. Magnesium does not do any of these things alone. It participates quietly, structurally, the way a key participates in the opening of a door. When people talk about this mineral in the context of sleep, they tend to reach for a single explanation. The actual story is that it is woven into the body at a level so fundamental that its absence shows up everywhere at once. Inside the brain, sleep depends on a balance between two competing systems. One drives wakefulness, the excitatory push of glutamate, the alerting electricity of the nervous system doing its job. The other pulls toward rest, the inhibitory spread of GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, the neurotransmitter that tells neurons to slow their firing. Magnesium sits at the boundary between these two. It potentiates GABA receptor activity, meaning it helps GABA bind more effectively, dampening neural excitability with more precision. In animal studies with magnesium deficiency, EEG recordings show altered spike patterns during auditory stimulation, the signature of a nervous system that cannot downshift when it should. The inhibitory side of the brain has a mineral it leans on. Your body holds most of its magnesium in places you cannot easily measure. About 60% lives in bone. The rest is distributed across muscle, tissue, and organs. Less than 1% circulates in the blood, which is why a standard blood test is a poor detective for magnesium deficiency. serum levels stay relatively stable even as tissue stores decline, because the body protects blood concentration at the expense of everything else. A person can be substantially depleted in the cells that need magnesium most, while a lab report comes back in range. The body does what it always does, maintaining the appearance of balance even when balance is quietly eroding. The National Institutes of Health recommends 400 to 420 milligrams of magnesium per day for adult men and 310 to 320 milligrams per day for adult women. Not aspirational targets, but the minimum to meet the needs of nearly all healthy adults. A national nutrition survey found that roughly 48% of Americans were consuming less magnesium than their bodies required. Nearly half. Not a rare edge case. Not a clinical population. Simply the ordinary consequence of a food environment that has drifted away from the sources where magnesium lives naturally. What the body needs in order to settle at night hasn't changed. What arrives on the plate has. Magnesium and calcium are in constant conversation inside every cell. Calcium is the signal for contraction. It rushes in. The muscle responds. The nerve fires. Magnesium is the counterbalance. It occupies the same channels, competes for the same binding sites, and moderates how much calcium gets through and when. Under resting conditions, magnesium ions sit in the NMDA receptor pore like a quiet doorstop, keeping excitatory signals from cascading unchecked. When magnesium levels fall, that doorstop becomes less reliable. Calcium comes through more freely. The nervous system runs a little hotter than it was meant to, and the body carries that heat all the way to bed. The body begins a series of quiet changes in early evening that have nothing to do with willpower. Core temperature starts to drop. Melatonin production increases. The hypothalamus begins shifting the nervous system from sympathetic alertness toward parasympathetic rest. Magnesium participates in this transition through several pathways at once. It dilates blood vessels, which helps the body shed heat to the environment, accelerating the natural temperature decline that signals sleep approach. It interacts with the pathways that influence melatonin. It modulates cortisol, the stress hormone whose concentration needs to fall for the night to deepen. The body's evening wind down is not a single switch. It is a sequence, and magnesium is woven through it. One of the quieter discoveries in sleep science is how magnesium affects slow-wave sleep specifically. This is the deepest non-REM phase, the stage where growth hormone is released, where cellular repair accelerates, where the glymphatic system is believed to clear metabolic waste from the brain. Magnesium's dual action as an NMDA antagonist and a GABA agonist has a particularly significant effect on this phase. In studies of magnesium-deficient subjects, slow-wave sleep is often compressed or disrupted. This matters not because deep sleep is the most impressive-sounding phase, but because it is the most restorative. The depth of a night's rest is not just about duration. It is about how long the body spends in the places where repair happens. Pumpkin seeds are not dramatic. They are small and flat and easy to overlook in a bowl of mixed snacks. But 1 ounce, a small handful, contains approximately 150 to 168 milligrams of magnesium, depending on whether the seeds are hulled and roasted. That is roughly 40% of the daily value in a portion that fits in the palm of your hand. This is not a supplement formulated in a lab or a dose carefully titrated in a clinical trial. It is food. present in the same form for thousands of years. Available at any grocery store. Requiring no prescription. The mineral has always been there. The body has always known what to do with it. Dark leafy greens carry magnesium in an interesting structural way. The green color of plants, the chlorophyll that captures light for photosynthesis, is built around a magnesium ion at its center. Every chlorophyll molecule is essentially a magnesium-containing compound. A cup of cooked spinach contains approximately 158 milligrams of magnesium, because you are eating the mineral that made those leaves capable of turning sunlight into energy. The same atom that drove photosynthesis in the plant is now participating in the chemistry of your nervous system. There is something quietly continuous about that. The mineral traveling from light to leaf to body, arriving in the same form it has always taken. The NMDA receptor is not just involved in sleep. It is one of the most studied ion channels in all of neuroscience, implicated in learning, memory consolidation, synaptic plasticity, and the regulation of pain. Magnesium's relationship with this receptor is therefore not a specialized sleep function. It is a fundamental aspect of how the nervous system manages excitation at every hour. What makes this relevant at night is context. During the day, some NMDA receptor activity is appropriate. It supports the processing and encoding of experience. In the hours before sleep, that same excitability becomes a liability. Whether the nervous system shows up for the night as alert or settled depends, in part, on what it has to work with. Cortisol follows a predictable rhythm in healthy adults, reaching its peak in the early morning hours and declining through the afternoon and evening. Disruptions to this rhythm, whether from chronic stress, poor sleep, or nutritional gaps, can keep cortisol elevated into the night. Multiple studies have found that magnesium supplementation can reduce serum cortisol concentrations. The proposed mechanism involves magnesium's influence on P-glycoprotein, a blood-brain barrier transporter that regulates how much cortisol enters the central nervous system. The stress that has followed you to bed is not entirely psychological. Some of it has a mineral address. The body and the day do not always separate cleanly at the pillow. Almonds carry about 80 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, roughly a small handful, or about 23 almonds. They also contain tryptophan, a precursor to serotonin and eventually melatonin. This is not coincidental in the sense of being designed. It is the way food works when it has not been stripped of its original composition. The nutrients in whole foods appear together in combinations the body has always recognized. Magnesium and tryptophan in the same handful. Not because someone arranged them, but because that is how the nut grew. The body does not need to decode the relationship. It receives them together, as it always has. There is a concept in nutrition science called the food matrix. The idea that nutrients in whole foods behave differently than the same nutrients in isolated supplement form, because they arrive embedded in fiber, fat, protein, and water. Magnesium from food does not carry an upper intake limit for healthy adults, because the kidneys efficiently excrete dietary magnesium in excess. Supplemental magnesium carries a tolerable upper intake level of 350 milligrams per day from supplements alone, beyond which gastrointestinal disturbance is common. The body has been calibrated to receive the mineral in the form it arrives in greens or seeds, not separated from everything it came with. Magnesium's effect on muscle relaxation works at the level of the neuromuscular junction, the place where a nerve signal arrives and tells a muscle fiber what to do. In a well-supplied cell, magnesium moderates the release of acetylcholine from the motor nerve terminal, the neurotransmitter that triggers contraction. By doing so, it helps maintain the balance between the signal to contract and the signal to release. When that balance tips, when magnesium is low and calcium goes relatively unchecked, muscles hold, not dramatically, not in ways that register as pain, just a persistent low-level bracing. A texture of readiness the body carries, even when readiness is no longer called for. The kidneys regulate magnesium excretion with remarkable responsiveness. When dietary intake is adequate, they excrete the excess. When intake falls, they reduce excretion to conserve what the body has. This system works well under normal conditions. It works less well under chronic stress, because stress hormones, particularly adrenaline, increase urinary magnesium loss. The body under sustained pressure literally lets go of the mineral it needs to settle down. Stress depletes magnesium. Lower magnesium amplifies neural excitability. Amplified excitability makes stress harder to regulate. The cycle does not require any single catastrophic event. It runs quietly in the background of an ordinary week. Chia seeds contain approximately 111 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, alongside omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, and calcium. They are also among the sources most studied for their glycemic effects, the way they slow the absorption of carbohydrates and moderate blood sugar fluctuations. Blood sugar stability has its own relationship with sleep, because glucose swings that follow refined carbohydrate intake can trigger cortisol release in the night as the body tries to correct a drop. A tablespoon of chia seeds is not a medical intervention. It is a food that arrives with several properties the body finds useful in the hours when it is trying to wind down. There is a kind of quiet inside a cell that most people never think about. Research published in Nature found that the concentration of magnesium inside cells actually rises and falls with the body's internal clock, cycling through a daily rhythm that influences how efficiently cells use energy at different hours. The concentration appears to act as a brake on biochemical processes that drive cellular activity, slowing them at certain hours and releasing them at others. The circadian system is not just about light and darkness. It reaches into the chemistry of the cell itself, into a mineral that shifts with the hour and shapes what the cell can and cannot do efficiently at any given time. Black beans, boiled, contain approximately 60 milligrams of magnesium per half-cup serving. They also provide substantial plant-based protein, iron, and resistant starch, a form of fiber that passes through the small intestine largely intact, feeding the beneficial bacteria of the large intestine and producing short-chain fatty acids associated with lower inflammation markers. The pattern that emerges across magnesium-rich foods is not accidental. The same foods that deliver the mineral also deliver fiber for the gut, protein for overnight repair, and compounds that dampen the low-grade inflammatory tone that chronic stress accumulates. They cluster in the same foods because that is how the plant grew. The stress cycle and magnesium depletion have another interesting intersection. Exercise. Physical activity increases magnesium requirements, both because muscles use it during contraction and because sweat and urine carry it out of the body. For people who exercise regularly and eat a diet that skews toward processed foods, the gap between need and intake can be meaningful. This is not an argument against exercise. It is an argument for understanding that the activity that relieves stress also shifts the nutritional landscape, and that the minerals most associated with recovery and rest may need more deliberate attention in that context. Whole grains, particularly unrefined ones, retain the magnesium-rich bran and germ layers that are stripped away in milling. 1 cup of cooked quinoa contains approximately 60 milligrams of magnesium. Brown rice carries nearly 4 times the magnesium of white rice per serving. The gap between what a grain originally contained and what arrives on the plate after processing is not just about fiber. It is about the mineral content that lived in the outermost layers of the seed. The layers most associated with the grain's own biology of growth and repair. What gets removed in refinement is not just texture. It is the concentrated nutritional matrix from which the plant's own systems operated. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, is the body's primary stress response system. When a stressor is perceived, the hypothalamus signals the pituitary, which signals the adrenal glands to release cortisol. Magnesium acts as a regulator of this cascade at multiple levels. It modulates the sensitivity of the hypothalamus to stress signals, influences the binding of stress hormones to receptors, and shapes how the nervous system returns to baseline after activation. Well-regulated magnesium status does not make the HPA axis non-responsive. It makes it more proportionate, more capable of activating when needed and returning to quiet when the trigger has passed. The stress response is not the problem. The inability to come back from it is. There is a particular quality to the exhaustion that follows chronic low magnesium. Not the clean tiredness of physical effort, but something flatter and more resistant. Muscle fatigue arrives more easily. Sleep restores less completely. The threshold for feeling wired despite being tired drops lower. This is consistent with what the physiology suggests. A nervous system that cannot fully downshift. Muscles that cannot fully release. A cortisol curve that stays elevated a few hours past where it should. The body carries more effort than the circumstances require. That is not weakness. That is chemistry doing something specific. In response to a specific gap, the nervous system running a little hotter than it needs to, because one mineral is missing from the conversation. Notice that it doesn't require anything dramatic. No single crisis. Just an ordinary week with not quite enough of the thing that tells your cells it's time to settle. Something in your jaw or your shoulders may recognize what that feels like. That low-level holding that doesn't fully release even when you've decided to stop. Let one breath move through that place right now. The next part of tonight follows what happens when the body starts to get what it's been asking for. Magnesium's interaction with GABA receptors is particularly relevant to the quality of sleep in the first cycle of the night. GABA receptor activation is critical for the initiation and maintenance of non-REM sleep. And the GABA system is the same system that sleep medications like benzodiazepines and Z-drugs target, though through a different mechanism and with a very different safety profile. Magnesium's potentiation of GABA activity is subtler. It does not override the system. It supports it. Helps it function closer to its natural capacity. The difference between supporting a system and hijacking it is significant. One leaves the system intact and capable. The other creates dependency. One of the longest-running threads in nutrition research is the question of what happens to a population when the typical diet consistently falls below the threshold for a nutrient that most biochemical systems require. Magnesium is not rare in nature. It is present in soil, in water, in the foods that grow from that soil. The modern dietary gap exists not because magnesium disappeared, but because the foods that carry it most densely have moved to the margins of the typical plate, replaced by refined grains and processed products, stripped of the brown layers where the mineral lived. What the body needs in order to settle at night has not changed. What arrives at the table has. You may already know how you feel when you've been eating well for a week. Muscles that release a little more easily. A night that doesn't need to be fought quite as hard. The clinical picture is more modest than that feeling, but it moves in the same direction. What the studies show about magnesium and sleep is more honest than most supplement claims. A 2025 randomized, placebo-controlled trial, the largest of its kind at the time, enrolling 155 adults with self-reported poor sleep, found that 250 milligrams of elemental magnesium as bisglycinate daily produced a real but modest improvement in insomnia severity scores over 4 weeks. The benefit was similar to the difference between a night where you lay awake for half an hour longer than usual and a night where you didn't. The people who improved most were those with the lowest baseline dietary magnesium intake. The benefit landed where the gap was largest. Magnesium glycinate, a form in which magnesium is bound to the amino acid glycine, has been of particular interest in sleep research for reasons beyond the magnesium itself. Glycine is independently associated with improved sleep quality, partly through its ability to lower core body temperature by dilating blood vessels at the skin's surface. When magnesium and glycine arrive together in this chelated form, the combination may support sleep through overlapping mechanisms. The magnesium working on GABA and NMDA pathways, the glycine contributing its own quiet chemistry. The form a supplement takes can matter, not because one form is natural and another isn't, but because the molecular pairing changes what the body does with it. Spinach, one of the most magnesium-dense vegetables commonly available, offers approximately 157 milligrams per cooked cup. Raw spinach contains significantly less per serving, because the same cup, when leaves are uncooked, holds far less plant material and therefore far less mineral. Cooking concentrates spinach dramatically, which means that a cup of sautéed greens delivers something close to half the day's magnesium target for many women. This is not a reason to eat only cooked spinach. Raw greens have their own nutritional character. It is simply a fact about how the same food changes in what it offers depending on its form. There is a bidirectional relationship between magnesium status and sleep quality. Low magnesium predicts poorer sleep. Poor sleep, in turn, is associated with lower intracellular magnesium levels, partly because sleep deprivation increases cortisol, and cortisol increases urinary magnesium excretion. The two things that should offset each other instead amplify each other when either goes wrong. Adequate magnesium supports better sleep. Better sleep preserves magnesium. The relationship runs in both directions, which means small improvements in either tend to propagate into the other, quietly, over time. The way a tide that turns at one end of a bay moves through the whole. The melatonin story is more complicated than the supplement aisle suggests. Melatonin is not something the brain simply releases on a schedule. It is produced in a pathway that depends on the availability of tryptophan, which is converted to serotonin, which is then converted to melatonin under the influence of darkness and specific enzymes. Magnesium participates in several steps of this pathway. particularly in the enzyme reactions that convert tryptophan to serotonin. Magnesium's relationship with melatonin is upstream. It does not directly deliver melatonin, but it supports the conditions under which the body can produce it on its own. Supporting the pathway is different from bypassing it. Cashews contain approximately 72 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, alongside copper, a mineral involved in dopamine and norepinephrine production, and zinc, which is involved in immune function and testosterone regulation. One of the patterns that emerges across magnesium-rich foods is that they tend to cluster in the same botanical categories: nuts, seeds, legumes, leafy greens, whole grains. These are the same food groups that appear consistently in dietary patterns associated with lower inflammation, better cardiovascular health, and greater metabolic resilience. The convergence reflects the fact that nutritionally dense whole foods tend to carry multiple micronutrients together, because they evolved to support their own biological complexity. When magnesium stores fall, something specific happens at the level of the neurotransmitter system. The balance between glutamate and GABA, the brain's main excitatory and inhibitory signals, tips toward excitation. Glutamate presses forward. GABA cannot pull back with the same force. The result is a nervous system running above its resting set point, more reactive to stimuli, slower to return to baseline after a stress response. During the day, this might feel like difficulty concentrating or a low-level edginess with no clear cause. At night, it feels like lying awake with a mind that keeps finding things to process, long after there is nothing left that needs processing. Edamame, young soybeans, provide approximately 50 milligrams of magnesium per half cup, alongside a remarkable protein profile for a plant food. Soybeans are among the few plant sources of complete protein, meaning they contain all 9 essential amino acids. They also contain phytoestrogens, compounds that interact with estrogen receptors, which has made them a subject of research in the context of perimenopausal sleep disruption, a period when both estrogen fluctuation and sleep disturbance tend to peak. What is clear is that the same food carries multiple properties that converge on the biological conditions the body navigates at night. The impact of magnesium on muscle relaxation is not limited to skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle, the muscle type that lines blood vessels, the gut, and the airways, is also responsive to magnesium's calcium-moderating effects. Vasodilation, the widening of blood vessels, is one of the pathways through which magnesium supports the core temperature drop associated with sleep onset. As blood vessels near the skin's surface dilate, heat moves from the core to the periphery and dissipates. The hands and feet warm slightly as the core cools, a transition that happens every night in healthy sleep, and that magnesium actively participates in producing. Tofu, made from pressed soybean curds, contains approximately 35 milligrams of magnesium per 100 gram serving. It has been part of East Asian diets for centuries, arriving not because of its identified nutritional composition, but because pressed soybean products were a practical and abundant protein source in agricultural communities that often consumed little meat. The magnesium in tofu was not deliberately placed there by nutrition science. It was there because the original plant source carried it, and because relatively unprocessed preparations of a plant tend to retain what the plant originally contained. The mineral is a feature of the preparation, not an addition to it. Nitric oxide, a molecule the body produces from the amino acid arginine, plays a role in regulating blood vessel tone, and magnesium participates in its synthesis pathway. When magnesium levels are adequate, nitric oxide production supports the vasodilation that allows the body to shed heat in the evening and move blood efficiently to the periphery. When magnesium falls, this pathway can become less efficient, contributing to tightened vascular tone that keeps the body running warmer than it should at night. The same mineral that helps muscle fibers release also helps the vessels that carry blood through them relax. Lima beans offer approximately 40 milligrams of magnesium per cooked half cup, alongside a form of starch that has a particularly low glycemic index. The rate at which blood sugar rises after eating. Foods that moderate blood sugar fluctuations reduce the likelihood of nighttime cortisol spikes triggered by low blood sugar in the early hours. The relationship between evening eating and overnight biology is not simple, but the consistent pattern is that meals and snacks higher in fiber, protein, and magnesium tend to support more stable overnight blood sugar, which removes one more biological reason for the body to activate in the middle of the night. Dark chocolate, specifically chocolate with a high cocoa content, 70% or above, contains approximately 65 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, alongside flavonols, antioxidant compounds associated with improved endothelial function. The presence of magnesium in dark chocolate is not a discovery. Cocoa beans naturally accumulate the mineral from the soil in which the cacao tree grows. High cocoa dark chocolate retains more of the original bean's mineral composition than milk chocolate, which is diluted with dairy solids, added sugar, and far less cocoa. The mineral follows the cocoa. The less it is diluted, the more it arrives. In that same handful of quinoa your body settles into after dinner, the mineral is present without announcement, roughly 60 milligrams per cooked half cup, alongside a complete protein profile and a notably lower phytic acid content than many other seeds. Phytic acid is the compound that binds to minerals in the digestive tract and reduces their absorption. Lower phytic acid means more of the magnesium in quinoa is actually bioavailable, that it moves from the food into the bloodstream rather than passing through unabsorbed. The mineral has to be present, but it also has to be in a form the body can access. The research base for magnesium and sleep is honest in its heterogeneity. Different studies use different doses, different forms of magnesium, different populations, different definitions of sleep quality. A 2024 systematic review found that the majority of included trials showed at least modest positive results across diverse populations. But modest is the operative word. People with the lowest baseline magnesium showed the most improvement. Older adults showed more consistent response than younger adults. The picture that emerges is not that magnesium is a sleep solution, but that adequate magnesium status is a meaningful background condition, and that correcting a genuine gap tends to produce genuine but bounded improvements. The nervous system contains a specific set of neurons in the locus coeruleus, a small region in the brainstem that produce norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter associated with wakefulness, arousal, and the stress response. During sleep, these neurons become almost completely quiet. Their quieting is one of the markers of healthy sleep onset. Magnesium's role in modulating adrenergic signaling, the signaling that norepinephrine belongs to, means it participates. however indirectly. In the conditions that allow these neurons to stand down, the brain's transition to sleep is not about adding something soporific. It is about systematically reducing the activity of the systems that maintain wakefulness. Sunflower seeds provide approximately 37 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, alongside vitamin E, a fat-soluble antioxidant with particular relevance to cell membrane integrity and to the protection of polyunsaturated fats from oxidative damage. Cell membranes that maintain their integrity are more responsive to the ionic gradients, including the movement of magnesium, potassium, and calcium, that drive nerve conduction and muscle function. The coexistence of vitamin E and magnesium in sunflower seeds reflects the broader pattern. Nutritionally rich whole foods tend to carry multiple components that interact usefully with the body's evening chemistry. There is a category of magnesium deficiency that does not show up on standard lab panels, a state sometimes called subclinical or functional deficiency, where serum levels are normal, but tissue and intracellular stores have declined. This condition is difficult to diagnose through conventional testing because only about 1% of total body magnesium is in the blood, and the kidneys actively defend blood magnesium at the expense of cellular stores. Functional deficiency may express itself as fatigue, muscle tension, disrupted sleep, or heightened stress reactivity. Symptoms common enough to be attributed to stress or aging rather than a mineral gap. Some of what feels psychological may have a nutritional address. The role magnesium plays in ATP production connects to sleep and recovery in a specific way. Adenosine triphosphate, the cellular energy currency, must be bound to magnesium to be biologically active. The form the body uses is not ATP alone, but magnesium-bound ATP, the magnesium-bound complex. Without adequate magnesium, ATP is less efficiently synthesized and used, which affects every energy-dependent process in the body, including the repair the body conducts during sleep. The feeling of waking unrested is not always about the hours spent in bed. Sometimes it is about the quality of what the body was able to do during those hours. And that depends partly on how well supplied the cellular energy system was going in. Adenosine is the molecule the brain accumulates across the waking day, the chemical signal of sleep pressure, the substance that builds until the need for rest becomes impossible to ignore. The enzymatic pathways that produce and break down adenosine are part of purine metabolism, a biochemical system in which magnesium acts as a required cofactor. When magnesium is consistently adequate, purine metabolism runs cleanly, and the adenosine signal that tells the brain it is time for sleep accumulates and dissipates on a reliable schedule. When magnesium falls, the efficiency of these pathways may shift, subtly, not dramatically, but in ways that can affect how clearly the brain registers its own need for rest. Flax seeds carry approximately 40 milligrams of magnesium per tablespoon, alongside alpha-linolenic acid, an omega-3 fatty acid that the body converts to the longer-chain omega-3s, associated with anti-inflammatory effects. Chronic, low-grade inflammation, the kind that accumulates from stress, poor diet, inadequate sleep, and sedentary behavior, is associated with disrupted sleep architecture, particularly with reduced slow-wave sleep. The foods that carry magnesium also tend to carry compounds that address inflammation through different mechanisms. The relationship between what feeds the mineral system and what quiets the inflammatory one runs through the same foods. The bioavailability of magnesium from food varies significantly depending on what else is in the meal and how the food has been prepared. Vitamin D promotes magnesium absorption. Moderate fiber helps. Phytic acid, found in raw whole grains and legumes, reduces bioavailability, which is why soaking or cooking these foods matters. Cooking spinach increases the magnesium per serving by concentrating the leaves while also reducing oxalic acid, which can bind minerals. The mineral in the food is not automatically available. It is available within a set of conditions shaped by preparation, combination, and what the digestive system brings to the encounter. In animal studies of magnesium deficiency, EEG monitoring during auditory stimulation revealed altered spike potential patterns, the electrophysiological signature of heightened neural excitability. The behavioral correlate was heightened reactivity, more startle, less resilience. The same phenomenon in humans is harder to measure directly, but the phenomenology is recognizable. A sensitivity to noise at night, a tendency to wake at sounds that would have been absorbed by deeper sleep, a kind of vigilance that doesn't fully relax even in a quiet room. The neural signature of low magnesium is a texture of mild but persistent readiness, the body staying slightly more alert than the situation calls for. The hypothalamus contains the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the brain's primary pacemaker, the structure that synchronizes the body's internal time with the light-dark cycle of the environment. NMDA receptors in the suprachiasmatic nucleus play a role in entraining this clock, in allowing environmental light signals to reset the internal timer. Magnesium's voltage-dependent influence on these receptors means it participates, indirectly, in how precisely the clock is synchronized. This adds to the picture of magnesium as a mineral involved not just in falling asleep, but in the organizational architecture that determines when sleep is supposed to happen. What you just heard, the image of a nervous system that stays slightly more alert than the situation requires, because one mineral is consistently missing from the conversation. You may recognize that from the inside. The room is quiet. The day is finished. And something in the body is still checking. Notice where that sits right now. Not to fix it, just to know it by name. The second half of tonight follows what happens when the body begins to receive what it was asking for, and what that feels like from within. One of the most consistent findings in the magnesium sleep literature is the dose-response relationship within the context of deficiency. In populations with adequate baseline magnesium, supplementation shows limited additional effect. In populations with low baseline intake, the effect is more pronounced. This pattern is characteristic of correcting a nutrient gap rather than administering a pharmaceutical agent. A drug provides an effect regardless of baseline status. A nutrient, when depleted, restores the conditions for a system to function as it was designed to. The ceiling of what magnesium can do for sleep is not high. The floor of what deficiency takes away is lower than it appears on a blood test. Magnesium participates in the synthesis of proteins, including the structural proteins that repair muscle tissue overnight. The body's repair work during sleep is metabolically active, requiring ATP, amino acids, and mineral cofactors in the right proportions. Inadequate magnesium does not halt repair, but it may slow it or result in cellular-level inefficiency that accumulates as fatigue. The feeling of waking with muscles still tight, still carrying the weight of yesterday, may reflect not just movement patterns or stress, but a substrate that wasn't fully supplied for the repair work the night required. Whole wheat retains the magnesium-rich bran and germ layers that milling removes. Refined white wheat loses most of these layers, which is why whole wheat provides roughly 3 to 4 times the magnesium of refined white wheat per serving. The comparison illustrates what food processing removes, and why the gap between what the modern diet delivers and what the body requires has widened over the past century. The grain that arrives on the plate contains less of the mineral it originally carried. The gap was created by a change in what arrived. Magnesium's relationship with the neuromuscular junction includes its effect on acetylcholine release. Too much acetylcholine, too much motor signaling, can maintain a state of readiness in muscle tissue that resists relaxation. Magnesium moderates this release, acting as a physiological brake on the signal that tells muscles to stay engaged. This is part of the reason magnesium is sometimes described as a natural muscle relaxant, not in the pharmacological sense, but in the sense of supporting the signaling balance that allows muscles to follow the instruction to release. The instruction to let go is already there. Magnesium helps the body hear it. Sleep onset latency, the time it takes to fall asleep from lying down, is one of the most frequently measured outcomes in sleep research. A 2021 meta-analysis found that magnesium supplementation reduced sleep onset latency by approximately 17 minutes in older adults with insomnia. For someone lying awake watching the minutes pass, for someone whose window for sleep is already narrow, 17 minutes in either direction reshapes the night. The size of an effect is always relative to what it is changing, and the people this finding is most relevant to are the people most likely to be lying awake right now. The serotonin pathway connects magnesium to several elements of the sleep-wake system at once. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter with wide-ranging effects on mood, appetite, and gut regulation. And it is also the precursor from which melatonin is synthesized. Magnesium is involved in the enzymatic reactions that convert tryptophan to serotonin. Low magnesium does not prevent serotonin synthesis, but it may reduce the efficiency of these conversions, particularly under conditions of stress when tryptophan metabolism is already being redirected toward other pathways. The mineral that helps muscles release is also upstream, part of what helps the brain prepare for dark. Brazil nuts are an unusual case in the nutritional landscape of magnesium-rich foods. 1 ounce, roughly 6 to 8 nuts, contains around 105 milligrams of magnesium, but Brazil nuts are also the richest dietary source of selenium, a trace mineral with antioxidant functions and thyroid hormone regulation roles. 1 or 2 Brazil nuts per day covers most adult selenium needs completely. This concentration of 2 distinct minerals in the same food reflects how specific the mineral profile of foods can be, shaped by the soil composition of the regions where the tree grows. The mineral content of what you eat carries the geography of where it grew. The gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication network between the intestinal ecosystem and the central nervous system, operates partly through the vagus nerve and partly through the neurotransmitters produced in the gut itself, including roughly 90% of the body's serotonin. Magnesium plays a role in maintaining the gut environment, supporting intestinal wall integrity and influencing the microbial composition. Foods rich in magnesium tend also to be rich in fiber, which feeds the microbiome most associated with lower inflammation and more stable serotonin signaling. The pathway from dinner to the nervous system at midnight is longer and more indirect than it appears. The word relaxation, in the physiological sense, refers to something precise, the return of a muscle fiber to its resting length after contraction, through a process that requires the active reuptake of calcium from the cell. This reuptake is powered by ATP and modulated by magnesium. When magnesium is low and calcium lingers in the cell longer than it should, the muscle fiber remains in partial activation, not cramping, not visibly tense, but not fully at rest either. Morning arrives, and the shoulders are already back in their daytime position, as though the night did not reach them. The hormonal environment of perimenopause and menopause increases magnesium requirements for several interconnected reasons. Estrogen appears to support magnesium uptake and retention. As estrogen levels decline, urinary magnesium excretion may increase and absorption may decrease. Cortisol, which tends to run higher during this hormonal transition, further increases magnesium loss. Sleep disruption, extremely common in this period, itself reduces intracellular magnesium. The result is a convergence of pressures on magnesium status at the precise time when the nervous system is most challenged to regulate temperature, sleep architecture, and mood stability. Walnuts contain approximately 45 milligrams of magnesium per ounce, alongside the highest concentration of alpha-linolenic acid of any tree nut. They also contain melatonin itself, measured in small but detectable amounts in several studies. Whether the melatonin in walnuts survives digestion and reaches systemic circulation in biologically meaningful concentrations is a question the research has not fully resolved. The mineral, the precursors, the hormone, in the same nut, in the same handful. What the body does with that combination is one of the quieter things it manages without being asked. The magnesium content of drinking water varies enormously by geography, from near zero in soft water regions to over 100 milligrams per liter in areas with calcium and magnesium-rich geology. Hard water, water that has traveled through limestone and dolomite, carries these minerals naturally. Drinking bottled water, using softened tap water, or living in a soft water region changes this dietary variable in ways that are rarely accounted for in assessments of magnesium intake. The mineral arrives through the glass as well as through the bowl. An 8-week randomized controlled trial by Abbasi and colleagues, one of the most cited in the magnesium sleep literature, administered 500 milligrams per day of supplemental magnesium to 46 elderly participants with primary insomnia. At the trial's end, the supplementation group showed improvements in sleep onset latency, total sleep time, sleep efficiency, and insomnia severity scores, as well as improvements in serum melatonin and cortisol concentrations. The findings are real. They also involved a specific population, older adults, a group particularly likely to have low magnesium intake and impaired absorption. In a supervised clinical setting, extrapolating them to the general adult population requires care. The kidneys are the primary regulators of magnesium balance in healthy adults, and the main site of magnesium conservation when intake falls. In people with chronic kidney disease, this regulatory system is impaired, which means that magnesium can accumulate to levels that are harmful. For people with compromised kidney function, the dose that is safe for a healthy adult can reach dangerous levels in the blood. The recommendation to eat magnesium-rich foods does not carry this caveat. Dietary magnesium from food is handled differently because the gut modulates how much is absorbed. The supplemental form bypasses some of this regulation. Tryptophan, the amino acid precursor to serotonin and melatonin, is present in notable concentrations in pumpkin seeds. The combination of tryptophan and magnesium in the same food is not incidental. In a well-supplied nervous system, the enzymatic pathway from tryptophan to serotonin to melatonin runs more smoothly when magnesium is available. In a state of depletion, the pathway may be less efficient, not broken, but operating below its capacity. The handful of seeds before bed is not a sleeping pill. It is a delivery of two things the pathway needs, together, at a time when the pathway is trying to run. The calming quality attributed to foods like warm milk, chamomile, and valerian root has been studied with varying results. What is more consistent in the research is the effect of overall dietary pattern, not single foods, but the consistent presence of a diet high in magnesium, fiber, and plant protein. Studies comparing Mediterranean-style dietary patterns to typical Western patterns consistently find better sleep quality in the former. Not because of any one ingredient, but because the aggregate nutritional composition shifts the body into a different metabolic state by the time night arrives. The sleep conversation is a dietary conversation. When magnesium comes from food, the gut absorbs what it needs and modulates uptake based on current status, increasing absorption when depleted, reducing it when stores are sufficient. The tolerable upper intake level of 350 milligrams per day applies only to supplemental magnesium, because only supplements can bypass the gut's regulatory mechanism. This built-in system is why traditional populations eating whole food diets that happen to be magnesium-rich did not develop magnesium toxicity. The regulation was already in place. The body has always known how to manage what arrived in food. Magnesium's role in DNA and RNA synthesis means that it participates in the cellular machinery responsible for producing every protein the body needs, including the proteins that make up the receptors and enzymes that all the other facts in tonight's story depend on. The GABA receptor that magnesium helps activate is itself a protein that required magnesium for its synthesis. The enzymes that convert tryptophan to serotonin are proteins. The cofactor is also, one step back, involved in producing the structures it later participates in. This recursive quality is what makes it genuinely fundamental. Avocado provides approximately 29 milligrams of magnesium per half fruit, alongside monounsaturated fatty acids and potassium. Potassium and magnesium work together in the regulation of cellular membrane potential, the electrical charge across cell membranes that governs how easily neurons fire. Low potassium, like low magnesium, raises resting excitability and lowers the threshold for muscle cramps. The two minerals are often depleted in parallel by the same factors: stress, diuretics, excessive refined carbohydrate intake, inadequate vegetable and legume consumption. Foods that carry one tend to carry the other. The relaxation of smooth muscle in blood vessel walls is one of the mechanisms through which magnesium contributes to the modest blood pressure effects observed in some, though not all, studies of magnesium supplementation. As arterial smooth muscle relaxes, the vessels dilate, resistance falls, and blood pressure drops slightly. What matters for tonight is not the blood pressure finding, but what it points to. Magnesium influences vascular tone, and vascular tone is part of how the body redistributes heat from the core to the periphery during sleep onset. The vasodilation that lowers blood pressure and the vasodilation that helps you fall asleep are the same event. Seeds in general: pumpkin, chia, flax, sunflower, sesame, are concentrated packages of mineral nutrition, in part because they are the reproductive units of the plant, equipped to sustain a new organism through germination. The seed has to carry everything a germinating plant will need before its roots develop and before its leaves begin photosynthesis. Magnesium is part of that starter kit, the mineral required for the first enzymatic reactions of growth. Its density in seeds is a reflection of what growth requires, carried forward into the hands of anyone who eats them. When sleep researchers study the effect of dietary patterns on sleep quality, the strongest associations are not with individual nutrients, but with overall dietary patterns characterized by nutrient density and low levels of processing. Mediterranean-style diets, high in legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and green vegetables, consistently show associations with better sleep duration and efficiency in observational studies. The foods that deliver magnesium also deliver fiber, anti-inflammatory compounds, and the glycemic stability that together create a nutritional baseline the nervous system can rely on when it is trying to rest. Swiss chard is one of the more magnesium-dense leafy greens commonly available, with approximately 150 milligrams per cooked cup, close to the magnesium content of a handful of pumpkin seeds. It is also high in potassium, vitamin K, and betalains, the pigment compounds that give red chard its color and carry antioxidant properties. Chard is also high in oxalic acid, which can bind minerals and reduce absorption. But cooking reduces oxalic acid concentrations, and pairing chard with lemon juice has been shown to reduce this effect further. The mineral is there. The conditions for accessing it are learnable. Magnesium's influence on sleep is also mediated through its effect on the autonomic nervous system, specifically the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. Multiple studies have found that adequate magnesium status is associated with higher heart rate variability, a marker of parasympathetic dominance and cardiovascular flexibility that is also one of the strongest physiological predictors of healthy sleep quality. Low heart rate variability, a sign of sympathetic dominance, is associated with difficulty falling asleep and reduced slow wave depth. The mineral that helps muscles release and GABA receptors activate also tips the whole nervous system toward the branch that knows how to rest. The practice of soaking legumes before cooking them reduces phytic acid, the compound that binds minerals including magnesium and reduces their bioavailability. Soaking black beans for 8 to 12 hours and discarding the soaking water before cooking increases the amount of magnesium that moves from the beans into the bloodstream. People have practiced this for generations without knowing the biochemical mechanism. Traditional food preparation methods often accomplish nutritional optimization intuitively, not because the people practicing them knew about phytic acid, but because experience showed that soaking made the food settle better. There is a quality to magnesium adequacy that is difficult to notice when you have it, and harder not to notice when you don't. It is not sedation. It is not heaviness. It is closer to the feeling of a body that releases when asked, of a nervous system that responds to what arrives rather than amplifying it, of a night that comes because the body moved through its transition rather than being pushed. Adequate magnesium does not guarantee good sleep, but it removes one of the quiet obstacles that stack against the body's own intelligence. And that intelligence, given a clear path, already knows the way. Something is settling in you now. The way the mineral moves through the body, quietly, doing its work without announcement, without asking to be directed. Let that same quality move through your breath. No effort required. What has been circling all night is almost here. The oldest instruction the body has is also the quietest one. Eat the foods that carry what you need. Pumpkin seeds, spinach, almonds, black beans, chia seeds, dark chocolate, quinoa, whole grains, not as a protocol, not as a prescription, as a pattern, sustained across days and weeks, becoming the nutritional baseline from which the body's systems operate. The research on magnesium and sleep is modest. The evidence for dietary quality and overall health is not. A serving of cooked spinach, a handful of pumpkin seeds, and half a cup of black beans together deliver roughly 370 milligrams of magnesium, the mineral that participates in 300 enzymatic reactions, that potentiates GABA, that helps cortisol fall and muscles release. It is not hidden in rare supplements or expensive formulations. It is sitting in the kitchen, in forms that have been available for as long as people have been eating from the ground. When the body is consistently supplied with the minerals it requires, the systems that maintain the GABA-glutamate balance, that moderate cortisol, that support the melatonin pathway, those systems operate closer to their baseline capacity. Not perfectly, not without interference from stress or light or the difficulty of the day, but closer. The evening transition becomes less of an act of will and more of a return to a state the body has been moving towards since mid-afternoon. The research showing that people with the lowest baseline magnesium benefit most from supplementation carries an important implication. For people already eating a magnesium-rich whole food diet, supplementation adds relatively little. The benefit is in closing a gap, not in exceeding a sufficient threshold. Nutrition is less about optimization past adequacy and more about reliably arriving at it. The gentle quality of magnesium's mechanism, supporting systems rather than overriding them, potentiating what's already there rather than substituting for it, is reflected in how the body responds when adequate intake is restored. The shift is not dramatic. Sleep doesn't transform overnight. What changes, over days to weeks, is closer to a texture, muscles that release a little more fully, a mind that follows the body into quiet more readily, a night that is simply less contested than it was. Pumpkin seeds are also high in zinc, a mineral involved in immune function, in iron, for oxygen transport, in healthy fats that support cell membrane fluidity. The combination is appropriate for a seed intended to survive and germinate. What makes pumpkin seeds valuable is not one thing about them. It is that all of the things about them arrive together, to be received by a body that evolved to process them that way. The body's transition into deep sleep is associated with a specific pattern of brain activity. Delta waves, slow, high-amplitude oscillations that mark the deepest non-REM phase. These waves are generated through a complex interplay of thalamic and cortical circuits that require appropriate inhibitory tone, appropriate GABA activity, and appropriate downregulation of the excitatory systems that drive wakefulness. Magnesium sits upstream of several conditions that make delta wave generation possible. Its absence can compress this phase, reducing the depth of restorative sleep even when the total hours remain unchanged. There is a form of caring for the body that does not feel like discipline or effort, that arrives instead as a kind of ordinary attention. Pumpkin seeds in a container on the counter, spinach in the refrigerator, black beans already cooked and waiting. The body asks for specific things in very ordinary forms. Meeting it there is a practice of gentleness, not of performance. Research into magnesium and anxiety has found a consistent pattern. Adequate magnesium status is associated with lower anxiety markers, and magnesium supplementation has shown at least modest effects on anxiety symptoms in some populations. This is relevant to sleep because anxiety and sleep disturbance are among the most strongly correlated symptom pairs. Each exacerbates the other, and each responds, at least partially, to the same nutritional conditions. A nervous system that is less excitable is less prone to lying awake cataloging unfinished things. Nearly half of American adults aren't getting enough magnesium from their diet because the usual blood test doesn't catch that gap. Deficiency doesn't show clearly until it's quite advanced. Many people carry it without a name for it. A meaningful proportion of those experiencing poor sleep, persistent muscle tension, or stress that feels disproportionate may be experiencing the physiological consequences of a mineral gap that has never been identified. It may be worth looking at the plate before looking elsewhere. The food sources that carry the most bioavailable magnesium are also, with few exceptions, the foods associated with the greatest overall nutritional benefit in population studies. Magnesium is concentrated in plants, in the parts of plants most associated with cellular complexity, with growth, with the enzymatic machinery of life. Those same parts carry fiber, vitamins, phytonutrients, and other minerals. They arrive together in the seed, the leaf, the legume, not because someone designed it that way, but because that is how these plants built themselves. There is something to be said about the modest size of magnesium's benefit in well-designed trials. An effect size that statisticians would call small, a 17-minute reduction in sleep onset latency, on average, in an older adult population, is real but bounded. These findings do not undermine the mineral's importance. They place it accurately in context. Sleep is determined by dozens of overlapping factors. Magnesium is one thread. It is a significant thread, and one that is often frayed. Restoring it does not resolve the whole. It restores the thread's contribution to the cloth. The practice of eating in ways that consistently supply magnesium does not require thinking about magnesium. It requires building a relationship with a set of foods. Dark leafy greens, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, dark chocolate, and establishing the conditions in which those foods are present and accessible rather than peripheral and occasional. This is less a nutritional prescription than a shift in what the kitchen contains and what the weekly rhythm makes space for. The body navigates the rest. Magnesium is stored in bone, and bone serves as a reserve for acute depletion, releasing magnesium into the bloodstream when intake falls. At the cost of bone density over time, prolonged dietary magnesium insufficiency does not just affect sleep and muscle tone. It draws down a structural reserve. The mineral asked for at night is the same mineral the skeleton holds in trust for moments of acute need. What you eat tonight is not only for tonight. The broader context for magnesium research is a nutritional landscape in which multiple essential minerals, zinc, potassium, calcium, magnesium, are chronically underconsumed in populations eating heavily processed Western diets. These minerals do not operate in isolation. Their functions overlap. Their absorption pathways interact. Their deficiencies compound. Sleep is at the end of a chain of metabolic events that all require a functional mineral environment to run cleanly. The body's capacity to rest at night reflects, in part, the quality of care it has received all day. Foods that carry magnesium are also, with notable consistency, foods associated with lower processed food consumption. The magnesium-rich diet is often also the lower inflammation diet, the higher fiber diet, the lower glycemic diet. Attributing the sleep benefits entirely to magnesium may be an oversimplification. Attributing them entirely to other variables and dismissing magnesium's role may be equally imprecise. The mineral is part of a pattern. The pattern is what the body experiences as a whole. The specific timing of magnesium intake within the day has been studied relatively little. Some research suggests that taking supplemental magnesium in the evening may be associated with improved sleep outcomes. But the evidence base is thin. For food sources, the question of timing is less pressing. The body stores and mobilizes dietary minerals across the day, drawing on what has been supplied over hours. Consistent intake throughout the day builds the tissue stores from which the body draws when sleep approaches. Eating a small evening snack that includes magnesium-containing foods does not cause an immediate surge in blood magnesium, but it is also not nutritionally irrelevant. The gradual absorption of magnesium in the evening may provide a modest contribution to the mineral environment in which the first sleep cycle unfolds. The act of eating something small and satisfying in the evening, something that does not spike blood sugar, is itself part of the body's preparation for rest. The relationship between magnesium and inflammatory cytokines associated with chronic sleep disruption is an area where the evidence is observational but biologically coherent. Low magnesium has been associated with higher circulating levels of C-reactive protein and other inflammatory markers. Chronic low-grade inflammation is associated with disrupted sleep architecture, particularly reduced slow-wave sleep. Maintaining adequate magnesium status is part of the broader nutritional strategy for keeping the inflammatory tone low enough that sleep can run cleanly. The body has been asking for something very specific all day, not in language, not in conscious demand, in the quiet currency of enzymatic efficiency, of mineral gradients across cell membranes, of GABA receptors that work or work less well depending on what arrived at lunch, at breakfast, across the accumulated meals of the week. What answers that request is the ordinary accumulation of attention to what you eat and to the relationship between what the body needs and what actually arrives. Restoring adequate magnesium intake through diet does not feel like taking a medication. There is no onset, no peak, no effect that announces itself as caused by the mineral. What tends to change, gradually, is the baseline, the resting tone of the muscles, the responsiveness to quiet, the ease with which the body moves through the evening transition. The improvements arrive as the background quality of how the body functions, quietly better. Over time, the mineral that blocks NMDA receptors, that potentiates GABA, that dilates blood vessels and helps the core cool, that modulates cortisol and participates in the melatonin pathway. This mineral is already in the body. It needs to be supplied, consistently and ordinarily, in the forms the body has always recognized. A handful of seeds, a bowl of dark greens, the simple foods that have carried it from soil to plate for as long as people have been eating from the ground. The science of magnesium and sleep, taken as a whole, is a gentle science. Its findings are real but modest, its mechanisms numerous, its practical implications about dietary pattern rather than supplemental dose. Sleep itself is gentle. It comes not when forced, but when the conditions exist for it. When the nervous system has been given what it needs to begin the series of quiet surrenders that take the body from awareness to rest. The mineral moves in the same register. Tonight, in countless ordinary kitchens, the foods that carry magnesium are present on shelves and in refrigerators, unremarkable in their ordinariness, waiting to participate in the chemistry of rest. They do not announce themselves as sleep medicine. They come as seeds and leaves and grains and beans, as food, as the most direct conversation the body has ever had with the world it lives in. That conversation has been happening since before any of us had words for it. You have been carrying this mineral through everything you have eaten. For as long as you have been alive, it has been doing its work in you, helping muscles release, supporting the chemistry of rest, without requiring your awareness, without asking your permission. Tonight, what changes is only this: you know a little more about what is already happening. Let that knowing settle. Let the work continue on its own. You were always allowed to receive this rest. Picture the mineral moving through the body the way water moves through soil. Quietly, following the gradient, going where it is needed without being directed. That movement is happening in you right now. Let everything you held today settle toward the places where it can do its quiet work. You were never the one keeping this going. The going is its own. Tonight has been 100 steps through something smaller than a grain of salt, through the mineral that sits at the intersection of everything the body needs to let go. Not a cure, not a guarantee. Something quieter and more honest. A presence at every doorway, making each one a little easier to pass through. What the science showed, in the end, is that the body was already moving toward rest. Magnesium doesn't produce that movement. It removes the friction. And in a nervous system that has been asked to hold so much for so long, removing friction is not a small thing. The pumpkin seeds in a bowl on a counter, the dark greens in a pan, the square of dark chocolate on the table. They were never medicine, and they were never nothing. They were the body's ordinary request, answered in the most ordinary way, with food, in the form that food has always taken. Something has already shifted in you tonight, not because of anything you did, but because of what you allowed to arrive. The chamomile in the next hour carries its own chemistry, a different kind of plant asking the nervous system the same quiet question. The next video in Food Science Facts to Fall Asleep To begins there. You don't need to reach for sleep anymore. Let your breath lengthen without measuring it. Let the weight of your body move into what is supporting you. The surface beneath you has been holding you this whole time without asking anything in return. Somewhere in the cells, the mineral is moving. The GABA receptors are accepting the signal they were built to receive. The muscles are doing what they do when the chemistry is in place. You who carry more than you should, who hold the day longer than the day requires. The holding is already loosening. Good night.